Eternia has always been a world populated by gods, monsters, and magic. But even among the nightmarish entities of Snake Mountain, only a few villains of He-Man are as instantly recognizable and intimidating as Trapjaw. He has a terrifying, jagged iron bite that can chew off the hardest of the metal known to humans, deep, glowing eyes, and a robotic arm boasting an endless arsenal of deadly weapons. He is the ultimate cybernetic killing machine. For many of us, he's remembered simply as Skeletor's heavy-hitting henchman from the original cartoon. A low IQ walking weapon always ready to follow orders, even if those orders end in a spectacular defeat. But underneath that colorful exterior is a past that's written in blood, betrayal, and unspeakable pain that can break the toughest of men in Eternia. Trapjaw wasn't always a machine, and he certainly wasn't always a servant to the Lord of Destruction, Skeletor. Before the cold steel pierced through his flesh in horrifying fashion, he was just a passionate man driven by ambition. A proud and brutal warlord who made a fatal mistake of challenging a power far greater than his own. He thought that the cybernetic transformation he endured was an upgrade, but it was a vicious punishment meant to break his spirit forever and take away all his autonomy from him. Today, we are diving into the darkest corners of Masters of the Universe lore. We are turning the pages on the acclaimed Icons of Evil comic series to uncover a gruesome tale of rebellion and mutilation. Get ready, because we are about to witness exactly how a conqueror named Cronis was torn apart only to be rebuilt into the monstrous Trapjaw. A story about Trapjaw that was never told before. Let's begin. Rising up as an icon of evil. The comic starts off with the narrator telling us that long before Adam took up the mantle of He-Man, or Skeletor terrorized the realm of Eternia, there lived a powerful and proud warrior called Cronis. Initially looking at his blue skin, I thought this was Skeletor before his fall, but the next panel quickly rectified my misconception, as Skeletor is seen reprimanding this warrior, who is confirmed to be named Cronis. Having been trapped behind the mystic wall in the dark hemisphere of Eternia, Cronis begins to grow increasingly disillusioned with Keldor, now called Skeletor's, leadership. The comic book's first few panels show the two having a go at each other regarding this. Cronis lashes out verbally at Skeletor, berating him by saying that his leader was no longer the man that he had followed into battles. As the rest of the evil henchmen look on in shock, it's clear that Cronis is no mere lackey and that he won't just follow anybody's orders, especially if he doesn't respect them. Skeletor measures him, sneeringly asking Cronis whether he thought he would be a better replacement to lead the forces of evil. In response to this, Cronis coldly threatens Skeletor to continue mocking him at his own peril. We then see Skeletor giving Trapjaw a rundown on the current situation in the Dark Hemisphere, and it looks like things are far more from ideal in this already hellish region. We learn that following the erection of the Mystic Wall, the Dark Hemisphere's already turbulent landscape had been thrown into further chaos. As trade routes were closed off and food became increasingly scarce, war had ravaged these lands, with its denizens even daring to attack Snake Mountain in desperation. Skeletor attempts to reason with Cronis, telling him that in such delicate time, rather than focusing on shoring up their defense, he wasted time on such trivial matters. Cronis, however, refuses to listen, stating that he would not be talked into obedience. Finally losing his patience, Skeletor blasts his lieutenant away with an energy beam from his staff, knocking the Wizard of Weapons out cold. He then banishes Cronis from the Snake Mountain, and has Beastman and Whiplash toss his mutinous lackey out of his bastion. Cronis wakes up to find himself outside in the harsh environment of the Snake Mountain, and with the ominous structure looming in the background, he skulks away, vowing to return one day to have his revenge. Not long after, he is ambushed by a group of marauders who seek to murder him for trespassing into their territory. This is one of the many warbands that have appeared across the Dark Hemisphere, which Skeletor had spoken about earlier. A brutal fight ensues between Cronis and these rogue warriors, and here we get to see the true measure of his mettle. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Cronis manages to pulverize every one of them single-handedly. After having defeated his ambusher, the banished warrior not only takes over their territory, but also makes them swear allegiance to him. It doesn't take long for us to realize Cronis' ambitions as he and his crew make their way to the much larger encampment of soldiers. Utilizing the cover of darkness, he makes his way into the tent of the commander of the sleeping army and kills him. However, their presence is marked by a sentry who alerts the resting army, and soon they have a massive force on their heels. However, this all seems to be a part of Cronis' master plan. Displaying the lifeless body of the general, Cronis gives the army two choices: either follow him and be assured of victory and plunder, or defy him and die. Here we see a marked departure from the way he had been previously depicted in other versions of the story till then. No longer is Cronis, aka Trapjaw, a psychotic jobber. Instead, he is a charismatic and willful leader who is not just skilled in combat, but also has the mental acumen to craft an intricate plot. The army obviously chooses to follow Cronis and thus begins his crusade to unite all the warring tribes and warbands of the Dark Hemisphere under his banner. Every enemy that falls before him and his army either bolsters his ranks or serves as a warning for all who defy him. We watch as his armies continue fighting till there are none that remain who would stand up against him. With no one left to challenge him and his undefeated army anymore, his subordinate asks him what was next for them. Cronis snaps at the soldier, telling him that what was next was none of their business. And while they had conquered all, there was one foe still that they had to best: Snake Mountain. The next panel shows Triclops rushing to deliver an emergency message to Skeletor about Cronis and his army. Bemused that his lackey had managed to actually amass a force, Skeletor inquires about where they are heading, but his mood turns sour instantly when Triclops tells him that they were headed for Snake Mountain. Clearly, Skeletor had never heard the saying "don't shoot the messenger" because he blasts Triclops away for delivering such news. Soon, the battle for Snake Mountain begins in earnest as both forces clash in an epic battle. Even as the valleys surrounding Snake Mountain echo with the roar of warriors and the clash of steel, a clear victor doesn't seem to be anywhere close to decided. We get to see Cronis leading the charge, hacking and slashing at his former allies as he makes his way towards Snake Mountain. However, all of the momentum gathered by him and his forces is halted abruptly by a massive blast that knocks him back while destroying all the soldiers caught in his radius. Skeletor had entered the battle, and just like that, the tides had begun to turn once more. I found this scene to be almost similar to when Sauron enters the battlefield during the siege of Mount Doom. The sense of awe and power that Tolkien's dark lore commands is very similar to what Skeletor inspires at the mountain. Seeing that his foe had finally entered the battlefield, a frenzy takes over Cronis as he begins to cut down all in his path while rushing towards the summit of Snake Mountain to face his former leader. As he scrambles to the edge, from where Skeletor had been raining death, Cronis wastes no time lunging at the master of Snake Mountain. While the battle seems even for a short while, with Cronis seeming to be at an advantage briefly, it all changes rather quickly. Had it been just a question of might, then Cronis would probably have prevailed. But it was not Keldor he was facing that day, but Skeletor, the master of the dark arts. In this, Cronis was right. Skeletor was no longer the man he once knew and followed. This was death incarnate before him. Skeletor raises his arms, burning off Cronis' face, and yet the warrior refuses to give up. Taking the opening presented to him, Skeletor grabs his staff and unleashes his entire fury on Cronis, bathing him in the unaltered and untamed energy from the staff. Despite losing a limb and his face resembling Skeletor's more than his own, Cronis refuses to give up and continues to put up a fight. However, by this time the fight was already over, and with a massive uppercut, Skeletor not only shatters Cronis' jaw, but also the will of his army fighting below. As Cronis lies on his knees broken, Skeletor raises him by the neck and hoists him over the pits of Inferno, dotting the landscape of Snake Mountain. There he holds his errant subordinate, preparing to toss him to his death. Even as the rebel army flees below, it is now made clear that Cronis had failed, and yet he tries to reach out towards Skeletor with what little life he has left in him. Thinking that this was Cronis' way of begging for mercy, Skeletor does acknowledge that he could be an asset to him, having proved his worth by amassing such an army. He tells Cronis that he had been sufficiently impressed to spare his life. Following this, he tosses away the fallen warrior to Triclops to do what he could to salvage Cronis' life, while he heads out to massacre the remnants of the enemy forces. The scene then switches to somewhere within Snake Mountain as a shadowy figure listens to Evil Lyn berating him for begging Skeletor for mercy after all the bravado he had shown previously. Cronis tells Evil Lyn that in that moment of his defeat, his actual intention had been to try and choke Skeletor with his dying breath. He also tells her that he had accepted this fate over death because he believed the adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Finally, as Cronis emerges from the shadow, he tells the witch that Cronis was no more. It was Trapjaw from now on. We get a final shot of Cronis, who is now the Trapjaw we are familiar with, augmented by his mechanical parts and weapons, as the story comes to an end. I personally thought this origin story of Trapjaw was so much better than the original. It makes him a much more credible threat while adding depth and layers to his character. The Masters of the Universe franchise has flirted with both serious and somewhat light-hearted tones in the past. However, I have to say I absolutely loved this much darker tone of the Image comic run from 2002. With the live-action film for this iconic series set to release soon, the Masters of the Universe franchise continues to grow well into the 21st century. As a fan, that is all that I can hope for. For now though, it's time for us to say goodbye. I hope to see you soon at the next one, and remember, by the power of Grayskull, you have the power.